Thank you. That's better. Last time we started talking about the pyramids. All right, the Egyptian pyramids. And where are the pyramids located?
All over the world.
Where are the Egyptian pyramids located? Don't say in Egypt. Where in Egypt? What side of the Nile? West side of the Nile. Yeah, west. Why west? Yeah, it represents death, right? Okay, good. And how many pyramids are there? The answer is lots. Okay, what I want you, don't say there's three. There's a lot of them. Okay, we focus on a few, but there's lots and lots of pyramids. Okay, even with the Great Pyramid, Khufu, which we're going to talk about more, there's three small pyramids in front. Those were his queens. They each had pyramids too. And there was a special building just for his mother. So yeah, they did a lot of that, okay? And yes, all of them are on the west side now. Down here, these are temples. We'll talk about those later in the class when we start talking about moon phases and gods and stuff like that. But right now, we're just going to focus on the pyramids. All right, what's the name for the burial chambers before they started making pyramids?
Mastaba.
Mastaba, okay. And then what was the first pyramid type? Pyramid. The step pyramid. And about when was it made? Approximately. Yeah, and you don't have to memorize that. 2600 BC would be pretty good, okay? All right, so this was the first one, and it wasn't really a pyramid as we think of them because the sides weren't nice and smooth, are they? What is the shape of a pyramid? What's the base shape?
Square.
Square. It's a perfect square, right? And then each side is a triangle, so they match at the top, right? Okay. And then we got the bent pyramid, and this was for Pharaoh Senefru. Yeah, good. And he didn't like the bent pyramid, so they actually ended up making the red pyramid. Okay. Who was the architect? Does anybody know? Imhotep, yeah, which they used in the movie The Mummy. They just liked his name so much. But he was actually an architect. In fact, he became very famous as an architect and kind of became like the patron saint of architects for Egypt. So his name gets used a lot. In the movie The Mummy, they make him sound like he's a bad guy. He's actually a really good guy. He's an engineer that designed the pyramids. All right, and after the red pyramid, we went to the pyramids of Giza. About when was this? And this is what we're talking about now.
1904.
About when?
Oh, the picture. I thought you were talking about a picture.
No, the picture was 1904. For this class, we're going to say around 2500. Okay. That's close enough for this class. We know the exact dates. One of the good things about Egypt is we really have a good chronology of all the rulers of Egypt back thousands and thousands of years. Pretty good. So know it a lot better than a lot of cultures. And which of these pyramids was built first? The biggest one, yeah. What's known as the Great Pyramid. Okay, this is the one for Khufu. Okay, and then Khufu's son was Khafre. Okay, and then his son was Menkaure, right? And those are the way they go. Now this picture is taken actually facing what direction? Cardinal points are important here, remember. Facing west, good. North is this way. Okay, so north is this way in the picture. Which way does the Nile flow? Towards the north or towards the south?
North.
North. It flows north into the
Mediterranean.
Mediterranean, exactly. Good. All right. And here's a more modern satellite picture. Actually, this was about 2005 or something, so fairly recent. And same thing, but this one I oriented to make sure that it's exactly straight north and south, east and west, so you can get the feeling for this. One of the cool things about, we're going to talk in detail about the Great Pyramid here, Khufu, is you can look at the alignment, which we're going to talk about, why they're perfectly aligned. But you can also look at their engineering and how perfectly square they made the building. The building on each side is about 746 feet long. Okay, now remember, there's an outer casing that's long gone. So you have to add that in. But the thing is perfectly square to within 2 inches over those 700 some feet. So not only did they line it up perfect, but their rectangle, their geometry on the ground was really, really good. Even modern buildings usually aren't that perfect. You usually don't know it. You know, you're like, oh, your building's off a little. It doesn't matter. They just kind of adjust things and you never see it. But even a house is usually not square, perfectly square. Because once you pour the concrete, and you put everything up, you just, you know, oh, wow, we just pound it wherever it is. But they did a really good job making it perfectly square. And we talked about the fact that these sides supposedly represent the slanting rays of the sun. Okay. All right. And we talked about this is Khufu, this is Khafre, this is Menkaure, and that there's complex. This whole complex went with this pyramid. This complex goes with Khafre's pyramid all the way out to the Sphinx, which we're going to talk about in more detail. And then Menkaure has a smaller complex over here. So the people around him, and it wasn't just family too, it was also high people in the order, you know, leaders, people like that also got significant tombs because you remember the Pharaoh is not a king. It's actually beyond a king, kind of halfway between a king and a god, or it's more of a god on earth is the way they would approach the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh, when they died, would actually continue to have duties and stuff in the afterlife. They didn't just go hang out and take it easy. They were supposed to carry forth their tasks, and to do that, they had to have the people that were surrounding them to support them. And so their administrators and all the people that were supporting them on the earth also were buried near them so that when they continued on in the afterlife, they would have them there for their support. Okay. Now it's not macabre or anything. When the Pharaoh died, they didn't kill everybody so they could bury them at the same time. No. When they died, they were buried, okay? It's not like, oh, we're going to sacrifice you all because you died. That's not the way. Egyptians weren't that crazy. They had a lot of weird things, but that was not it. All right. This just gives the layout more details and lists them. This was the causeway I was talking about, this part right here. It's part tunnel, part road that connects those. That's why we know they're connected together. All right, let's talk about the Pyramid of Khufu, or the Great Pyramid. The truth is, we actually don't know a lot about this pharaoh, other than he had this awesome pyramid. There is no likeness of him. Many of the other pharaohs, there are carvings that were probably likenesses of the pharaoh. There is one tiny statue about this big that we think might be representing him. That's all they've ever found. There's no written stuff on the inside of the pyramid much. There probably was when it was created, but over these thousands of years, and all of the pyramids have been looted and stolen, and anything inside it that was significant is gone. You know, when you put a tomb out there, they would probably bury with all kinds of riches. But yeah, the robbers and stuff, even when they tried to seal them off, eventually they were gone. And all that's long gone. Can't be found again. All right. This was built of about 2.2 million stones, roughly. So when you think about that, he's like, oh, 2.2 million individual stones. And the stones are not small stones. They're not like bricks. They're like this big. I'll show you pictures where you can see. You can see relative to the size of people. These stones, each of them weighed on the order of several tons. So you had to quarry the stones. You had to cut it out of the bedrock, which they did right by. They didn't bring it from a long ways away. Okay. That upper plateau is the bedrock, the limestone bedrock that they cut the stones out of and moved them to. But you still, to transport them, line them up all perfect, and move 2.3 million stones, we estimate would probably take about 100,000 people working 20 years to do it. Yeah. Now, archaeologists argue about this all the time, meaning some argue as much as 200,000 people, some say 20,000, but it's definitely up in there a large range. Now, the question archaeologists are arguing about now is, did they work all the time? Meaning, was it a full-time job and they worked for 20 years? There's speculation now that that wasn't the case, that most of these people were actually farmers. And they planted their crops after the Nile would flood every year. That was the biggest deal, was the Nile would flood every year in the spring. Okay? And it would flood, and then that water would go over the Nile Valley. And then when the water went away, that would bring all new fresh dirt that they would plant on. So just like refertilizing it every year. As soon as that was done, that's when they would plant the crops, right? But for a big part of the year, you wouldn't plant crops. And so what were the farmers doing? They may have been building pyramids. Now, this is all speculation. We don't know any of this for sure. Okay. Now, you know, there's rumors that they were done by slaves and all that. We really don't find any much archaeological evidence for that at all. It was probably built by Egyptians. Okay. Now, was it full time in the Egypt, you got to remember, was very rich, and they were just hired and that was their job? It's like being a government worker. Okay, I'm working on the pyramids. Or were they farmers that would go and it was like a part-time job? You do a part of the, all that were just speculation. We don't know for sure. Okay, people are still working on those things. All right. Okay. So one of the main things and why we're talking about it now is we want to know how they lined up the pyramids so that they match the cardinal point. And the key alignment, remember we talked about this last time, is this southeast corner is where they start their alignment. They build everything off that alignment. And remember this line here is pretty much straight north and south. It's not perfect. For the Great Pyramid of Khufu, it's off by about 6 arc minutes. Remember what an arc minute is? Arc minute is 1/60th of a degree, right? That is very close. With your eye, you can only see to a couple of arc minutes. So that is very accurate, especially over 750 feet. It's a long way, remember? That's like 2.5 football fields. So how did they make it that accurate? We don't know for sure. But this is the theory I think fits the data the best. And it's going to be the most accurate, is by using the stars. We talk about using the sun, but the sun is never quite as accurate because the sun moves around. And because the sun is actually a disk in the sky, the precise position of the sun is harder to determine than a star that's just a perfect point. So this is how we think they did it. And then I'll show you the evidence for why I think this is the right theory. There's lots of theories out there. Anybody know what this is?
Plumb line?
Yeah, it's a plumb line, or sometimes called a plumb bob, right? If you've done construction at all, you've probably used one of these. Or you've seen somebody use one. The idea is, right, if you hang something by a string and you just let it stay there, that direction is going to be perfectly up and down. That's how you make a building wall perfectly straight. You just put a line on it and the wall has to follow that line, especially if you're doing like bricklaying. You have one of these all the time. Otherwise, it's easy to get your bricks to start to wander one way or the other. So that's what the Egyptians had plumb lines. In fact, we have one image of a pharaoh where they had sticks and a plumb line hanging here. We think this is how they lined up the pyramids. We don't know. There's no caption that says this is what they were doing, but it seemed logical. Now, the problem is, if you're going to use stars, the best thing to do is to use your North Star, right? If the North Star happens to be exactly at the North Celestial Pole. But 2500 BC, there was a star that was very close to the North Celestial Pole. What star was it?
Lubin.
Lubin. So the North Celestial Pole was about 1.7 degrees off of Thuban. Or about 1 degree and 40 arc minutes. How close is Polaris now to us? We talked about that. It's at about 40 some arc minutes off. It's about 3/4 degree. So this was actually further away from the North Celestial Pole. If they had lined it up, the pyramid up on Thuban, then the side would be off by 1.7 degrees, not 6 arc minutes. So there's no way they used Thuban. They had to be more accurate than that. But we know they were very good astronomers. And so we speculate that there are 2 stars at this time. Remember, all this changes over time because of precession. But at about 2500 BC, this star here and this star here, this is the Big Dipper. Okay. This second star in the handle is called Mizar. Okay. And Mizar, if you drew a line to the other constellation is Little Dipper, right? And if you drew a line between them at this time, 5,000 years ago, 2500 BC, that pretty much goes exactly through the North Celestial Pole. So this star up here, by the way, is called Kochab. And so what they did is they drew a line between Mizar, this is M-I-Z-A-R, and Kochab in the Big and Little Dipper. And you see the North Celestial Pole is right there, and this line between these goes exactly through that, or as close as you could do with your naked eye. Okay. Then what they'd have to do to line this up perfect is you'd hang your plumb line out there. I don't know where I put my plumb line, but you'd hang the plumb line down, and then you would stand and you would line it up. So there's a guy with a pole, like you've seen surveyors doing it, and you make sure that looking straight through the line, the plumb line, to the pole, so that that line was straight up and down, so it exactly matched your plumb line, so that the stars, remember the stars would rotate, so that the stars were straight up and down, boom, you would have an exactly north-south line. You would mark that out at night. Then in the day, you'd have that marked out with stakes, and then you would measure everything off of that. From that line, you would make perfect 90-degree angles using your compass and straight edge and some geometry, which they knew, right? And that's how they laid out the pyramids. Okay. So now, if you're skeptical, like I am, I'm very skeptical by things. You say, okay, why didn't they pick 2 other stars and draw a line through them? And how do we know it was these 2 stars? And was this the same stars that they used for all the pyramids, or was this just one pyramid? All right, this is why I think this theory is correct. Because this chart right here. You're like, what? Does this make any sense? It does. Because you see this right here? This is time, right? And this right here, pyramid number 4, is the Great Pyramid. Okay? But the North Celestial Pole, because of precession, is going to move. So over that about 1,500 years, you keep using the same line, the North Celestial Pole is going to be in different spots. And so if we look at all the pyramids, all 1 through 8 of the major pyramids, they fall on this line except for 5 and 7. Which means if they're using that same 2 stars, the earlier pyramid should be further off because the North Celestial Pole moves. And then it should get closer, and the Great Pyramid just happens to be built at the time when it's closest to it. And then when you build pyramids afterwards, they get further and further away. Okay, but then why would these be off? The truth is they're not off. Because you see this line right here, the dotted line? This is a mirrored reflection of this line. So for all these pyramids, They aligned it with Kochab on the top and Miser on the bottom, which means it would be off on one side. But if you did it 6 months later when the stars were flipped over, because they're circumpolar stars, then it would be on the other side and it would match this mirrored line. So the truth is all 8 pyramids exactly match a line that's drawn between those 2 stars. No other theory for figuring out north, south, east, and west for the pyramids matches all 8 pyramids and matches it to the exact precision that they did. So this makes perfect sense from a evidence point of view. Is that proof? No, but we don't have any other theory that matches them that well. They talk about using the equinoxes, when the sun sets, rises exactly east and west, but you couldn't be that precise because of the same reason. The sun is too big and you get refraction effects and stuff like that as it goes down below the horizon. So it doesn't actually match up, not to that kind of precision. You could be within a half a degree, but you're not going to be within a few arc minutes. And the way that the variation exactly matches the same movement of the North Celestial Pole is pretty significant evidence. All right. So what stars did they use? Kochab and Mizar. I want you to know those 2 stars. All right. Now we're going to look at the inside of the Great Pyramid. So here's the pyramid. And what we've done is we're taking like a cutaway of it. And this direction is north, this direction is south. All the pyramids, the entrance is on the north side. There's no entrance on the south side. Why? Because towards the north, what kind of stars do you see?
Circumpolar.
Circumpolar stars. They didn't call them circumpolar. In fact, they called them the imperishables, the stars that never set. That is where the Pharaoh is trying to get to. These are transportation mechanisms to get them to these imperishable stars where they can rule in the afterlife. Okay, so to the north is very important for them. So all the entrances are on the north side. And then you see it goes down. And we talked about this before. This is probably going to be the original burial chamber. Like the mastabas, where the pharaoh was actually buried underground. There was a building on top, but they would dig down and they would be buried in the ground. Remember, the ground is just stone, and you just carve tunnels right through the stone. Remember, they had metal, right? This was the Bronze Age. They had metal tools at this point. And they had written language, which is what's really nice, because a lot of places we study, there was no written language. But they changed, and in here, they started a shaft going up. And then it opened up into a really big hallway we call the Grand Gallery. Most of their tunnels are fairly small, and you have to duck through it like this. They're not very big. Okay, but then all of a sudden you get to the Grand Gallery, and I'll show you pictures. It's really big. It's like, oh wow, they got elaborate in here. Off of the Grand Gallery, in here, there's a chamber that we call the Queen's Chamber. Truth is, we're not sure the Queen was ever interred there or not, but it makes sense, so we go with it. Then at the top of this is the King's Chamber. Okay, and the King's Chamber is not a big room. It's a room about from the front to about this second row here. Okay, it's kind of a square room that they built. But they did realize when you put this in here, and this was done while they were building it. Okay, as they built level upon level, they built this into it. They had to have these weight relieving chambers. Essentially, they had to have some really big, strong blocks up above it. Or when you added all that weight, that room would just crush in. So they had to engineer it so that it could support all the weight above it. Notice, this is actually drawn to scale here. This is not exactly in the center. We think they thought it was in the center. But if you're digging inside of it or you're building it inside, when it's that big, it's hard to know exactly where the center is. So it's not exactly in the center. It's actually a little bit towards the south. Remember, north is this way, south is this way. All right. Yeah, that's pretty much the inside of it. Now, once you go inside, let me show you a few pictures. So this is a picture on the outside. This is the original entrance up here. You see where they have these big stones they put? That was where you're supposed to go in. Now there's a second entrance. So they don't come in there. You actually come in down here and it meets up with this tunnel here. Okay, it's a structural thing. And here's pictures from the inside. This is the Grand Gallery. So, of course, they didn't have metal railings. That's all put in for modern people. You can go inside. All right, but all this was done by them, and they slope up the walls to give it strength. Okay, and it's very tall. So they built this big Grand Gallery right in here, this big hallway going up as you head up to the King's Chamber on the inside. All right, once you're in the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, they have two ventilation shafts. Both of them do. Okay. One that comes out this way, one that comes out this way, one that comes out this way, one that comes out this way. Truth is, they were not ventilation shafts. That's something we made up. Ventilation shafts would mean that it was like went to the outside and air came in. We've never found any place on the outside where it comes out. It just goes along, and they're about this big. They're about 9 inches by 9 inches. They're slightly they vary slightly in the different rooms, but they're all about that big. So you can't crawl through them. In fact, you can't do a lot through them. They did send a rover car up there with cameras to see what they could see, and it got up there. I'll show you what they found. But that's where these are. This is where one of the ventilation shafts comes out. Here is the King's Chamber on the inside. You see about how big it is? Looks like a fireplace. It's not a fireplace. It's just the way they built it in there. And you can see how it's very small. You have to kind of crawl in, and then it gets up to a regular sized room. Notice there's no pictures or colorings or anything on the side. All that's long gone. This is what they found when they sent the car up there. They got up there like 50, 100 feet or so, and it ran into a block blocking the thing. This block, though, was put in there by the Egyptians. And these are pieces of metal hanging from the block. But you can't get past that. So that was it. When they sent the car up, okay, if we ran into a wall, we're stuck. Why they did that, I don't know either. Nobody knows. We're not even sure why they put these in, except they're probably religious. All right, so notice the angles here. This one has an angle of 32 degrees. Okay. This one has an angle of 45 degrees. This one has an angle of 39 degrees. This one has an angle of 39 degrees. Okay? All right, time to get out your protractor. Because we're going to draw a herb diagram for the Great Pyramid. was gonna draw her, but I drew a pyramid in the middle instead, because that's what we're doing it for. So just draw your half circle. Flip the pyramid. Now, sorry, but I'm gonna confuse you here, because I told you never to do this, but then we're gonna do it, right? So I'm gonna put north over here. And south here. Why? Because I wanted to match this and I had north going this way, right? Now, usually we always put north on the left. I'm just gonna flip it around. Like seeing a mirror image of it. Okay, the latitude of the pyramids is almost exactly 30 degrees north. So what's that mean? Where's the North Celestial Pole?
$30 above north.
30 degrees where?
Above north.
Above the north point. So yeah, put your protractor on here. And go up 30 degrees on the right side, because this is where the North Celestial Pole is going to be. Okay, and then draw that line to your center. And label that as 30 degrees. Where is the celestial equator at? Yeah, how many degrees from the North Celestial Pole? 90 degrees. So yeah, you can put your 0 on the North Celestial Pole. Actually, you see, I follow my line I just made. Then I'm going to mark this at 90. Draw that line. And that's our celestial equator. This is 90 degrees. What is this angle here? What is the altitude of the celestial equator? 60 degrees. Good. This is like we were doing the other day with her diagrams. The only thing is it's flipped over, right? I usually have north to the right and I have it backward, but it's exactly the same thing. All right. North Celestial Pole for the Great Pyramid was how many degrees off from Thuban? 1.7, right? You have that in your notes? I already gave that to you. I just erased it. Okay, so it's 1.7 degrees off. So if it's here, 1.7 degrees above that, this is where Thuban would be. What is the Thuban's altitude? That tiny angle is 1.7 degrees.
31.7 degrees.
Yeah, 31.7 or approximately 32 degrees. Hey, that's at exactly 32 degrees. And it's not like 32 degrees, but they made it 32 degrees for 100 feet. I mean, they made it precisely exactly 32 degrees. In fact, that was the only reason they put it in there. It wasn't for ventilation. It was the shaft to point to Thuban. Why? Because it was the special star. It was the pole star at the time. So if that one points to Thuban, do any of these other ones point to something significant astronomically? The answer is yes, or I probably wouldn't have brought it up, right? Now, one of the constellations that we know was very important to the Egyptians was our constellation of Orion. The hunter. It looks kind of like that. Everybody's heard of Orion, right? They didn't call it Orion. To the Egyptians, this was, I know some of you took Star Lore, so I know you know this. We can go back and change your grades. Does anyone remember? Famous Egyptian god.
Osiris.
Osiris, thank you, yes. Who's Osiris? In Egyptian lore. The god of, yeah, afterlife. He's in charge of the afterlife. If you want to get to the afterlife, you have to appease Osiris and get written in the book of the dead. Your name has to be put there. So you have to appease Osiris. So this was a very important constellation to them. Nowadays, our current time, Orion's belt, right here, the center of it that I just erased, star Alnilam, actually Alnilam, I've been talking, so is right on the celestial equator. But 4,000 years ago, 2500 BCE, remember the whole sky is shifted. And so this belt star back then was at a declination of minus 15 degrees. Did we talk about declination? I don't think we did. Declination is how astronomers measure the position of a star in the sky. It's just like latitude. What's latitude on the Earth mean? How far you are?
Around it.
Far you are north or south of the equator. Declination is how far an object is north or south of the celestial equator. So minus 15 means that Orion's belt is 15 degrees below the celestial equator. So we're going to put that on our chart. Mean what you want to do is line up your protractor so it lines up on the celestial equator, because that's where we're measuring from. And then minus means it's towards the south. So I'm just going to go 15 degrees south of the celestial equator. Mark my point right there and draw that line. This is Orion's belt, or we would say Osiris. If we're talking Egyptians, right? Remember, every culture has their own constellations. Okay, so this angle between here is 15 degrees, because that's our declination. What is the altitude? How high up is that?
$60. 45 degrees.
60 to the celestial equator, but you have to go back 15. So what's 60 minus 15?
45.
45 degrees. Hey, what's that angle?
45.
45 degrees. You see the connection here? We think this points to Osiris or Orion's belt. Okay. All right. These two out of the Queen's chamber are also significant because what is the brightest star in the sky?
Sirius.
Sirius, in the constellation of
Canis Major.
Canis Major, the big dog, right? Sirius is the brightest star in the sky, and it was really important to the Egyptians. Why was Sirius so important? There's something called its helical rising. I know you guys talked about this in Star Lore too. When Sirius would rise just before the sun rose, you could just barely see it before the sun rises. That would signify what?
The Nile would flood.
The Nile would flood. It was a clock or calendar thing, right? So that star was very important to him. This shaft right here points exactly where Sirius would have been 2500 BC. Doesn't point to it now. The sky's changed. But of course, they didn't call it Sirius. They called it another Egyptian god,
Notice,
female,
Isis.
Isis. Egyptian goddess, I should say. Okay, and this one points exactly to one of their alignment stars. What are their two alignment stars?
It was
I just gave them to you a few seconds ago. A few minutes ago.
Kochab and Mizar.
Yeah, what was it? Kochab.
Kochab and Mizar.
Mizar. This points towards Kochab. All right. The thing that makes this neat is because of this, as you can see, we can work this out and figure out where the stars were, and that those point exactly to those spots. Is that proof? No. Is it highly suggestive? Yes. But we have nothing written down that says, oh, we deliberately pointed towards this. All we have is a shaft at that angle. But we know astronomy was very important to him. So that's what we speculated. The one that's probably definitely for sure is Thuban. The other ones just seem like that would be the convenient thing that they would do. All right. Let's talk about the Sphinx. Now, just to tell you, this is which pyramid? Khufu's pyramid, right? Okay, pyramid, or also known as the Great Pyramid. We don't see these ventilation shafts in other pyramids, at least not aligned like this. Okay, now they do have inner chambers, and they do go down, and they all are coming in from the north side. So those things are similar. So it's not in all the pyramids, but it's definitely in this pyramid. This is why we talk about this. It definitely has a astronomical line. Okay, let's talk about the Sphinx, just because it's very interesting. What is a Sphinx?
It's a line with the head of a man.
Yes, a lion with the head of a man, usually shown in a sitting reclined position. In Egypt, if you go to the Egyptian Museum, which you should because it's like the coolest place ever. In fact, they're redoing it because it was kind of weird. It was like this giant building, and you're just walking through, and there's all this priceless stuff from antiquities, all just laying around. It's not like a museum where everything's laid out and lit perfect and there's names on it. No, there's just stuff everywhere. We thought it was so cool. We went back. We went one whole day, and then we went back another day because we hadn't seen most of it. It's just that big. Now they're making a better, newer place. It's supposed to be better, but this was, well, when did we go? Like 10 years ago, at least now. It was quite a while ago. But yeah, and they have statues outside. All these statues that they made. And there are lots of statues of sphinxes, but most of them, the statues like this big, right? It's kind of like the lions you see around campus, right? They're just statues about that big, but they were sphinxes. So a sphinx is a very common shape that the Egyptians found important, okay? Or signified something important. Which way is the Sphinx facing?
It's facing east.
Yeah, remember the chart I showed you before? It's facing east. Why is it facing east?
Toward the rising sun,
Yeah, maybe,
awaiting the new day.
maybe. Other speculations?
Looking toward the light.
What's that? It does face towards the Nile? Yeah, it is on the west side of the Nile. So yeah, but you're right. Okay. Some say that maybe It was the protector. So all the action happens over on the Nile, right? Nobody attacks from the desert. That's crazy, right? So it's protecting from the Nile, and that's where people would come in. All those are probably right. We don't really know for sure, okay? Those are all probably significant. Now, the Sphinx is interesting in itself because, as you can see, I'll show you closer up pictures, and it's interesting, but it's not made of a whole bunch of stones put together and then they carved it. They actually just carved it out of the rock. So the ground was up here and they carved it down here and they got rid of the stone around it. They just carved it out of the bedrock, which is really cool to make that big a statue just carved out of the bedrock. And then over time it is eroded. They're worried about it now because there's more erosion that's occurred in the last 30 years than occurred in the last 5,000. Mostly because Cairo is huge and it's all the smog and everything from all the cars and everything like that. It kind of sits in this valley and gets hazy, but it produces a nasty chemical that tends to erode the rocks away. So not a good thing, but it's kind of the way it is. All right. And you can see this is whose tomb behind it, whose pyramid? Khafre's, okay? You can tell Khafre's right away because you see that still has some of the outer casing on it, where the other ones, the outer casing was long gone. Okay. Anybody seen this painting before? Who's this? Napoleon. Who is Napoleon? French
Dictator.
dictator, whatever you want to call him. He took over after the French Revolution. When did the French Revolution occur?
Late 1700s.
Yeah, we want to get some history in here, right? So the French Revolution occurred right after our revolution. When was our revolution? You better know that one.
1776.
1776. All right, the French Revolution started about 1789, 1790, right in there. In fact, some of the revolutionaries that fought in our revolution went and fought in the French one because they were just like mercenaries, like, oh, hey, another war, let's go there. All right, there were certain people that were just kind of into that, you know, they just did that, okay? The French did, at that time, they threw out all the royalty that had been ruling France forever, and they killed them. They didn't just throw them out, they killed them all using the guillotine, right? But Napoleon took over. Now, Napoleon, he was a peasant. He started out in the army as a cannoner. He would help to move cannons around. He worked his way up to become the leader of the whole army. And then once he did that, then he had visions of taking over all of Europe, right? But one of the first things he did is he went to Egypt and took it over, which is why if you go to France, they actually stole a bunch of Egyptian stuff. So in France, in Paris, you'll find Egyptian artifacts. And that's what's even worse is then those artifacts got stolen by the British later. And if you go to the British Museum, there's all kinds of Egyptian artifacts. And yeah, lots of the really important stuff like the Rosetta Stone. What's the Rosetta Stone?
Where it was the key for unlocking like the language because it had the same text in three.
Yeah, it was the key for deciphering Egyptian. Why? How did it work?
There were
Yeah, there were 3 languages written on, so it was actually a government decree. But the good thing is they wrote it in 3 exact languages. One of them was Greek, ancient Greek. We still had ancient Greek. And the other one was Egyptian hieroglyphs. So they're like, oh, we know what it's supposed to say now. We can translate. And that's how it was translated, was using the Rosetta Stone, which is why the Rosetta Stone became so important. The other third language, I don't remember what it was. It probably was, yeah, Persian or something. I don't know. But yeah, something there. But yes, and that's why that actually ended up, I think it's actually in London right now, the Rosetta Stone. But back to Napoleon. Who was the first one to go to the Sphinx? Does anybody know their history? Does anybody know the story behind the Sphinx?
was it Napoleon?
No, it was before Napoleon. He was following somebody else that he wanted to mimic. Have you ever heard of Alexander the Great? He was what? What country was he from?
Persia.
Greece, yeah, okay. And he had the same idea, right? He wanted to take over all of sense of the free world, right? fact, he pretty much was doing it, and who knows what happened if he hadn't died when he was young. Well, we shouldn't say that. He went over to India and was attacking, or that direction, and on the way back, he got sick and died, which is crazy for this great warrior to just get sick and die. I mean, he was a great warrior. He wasn't like generals nowadays. Generals nowadays sit back there with their binoculars and they, oh, you army, you go fight. He was in front. There's one story where they had to go over a wall and attack these people. He got to the top of the wall and they lost their ladders. He was by himself. And the soldiers told him, hey, jump back down and we'll attack again. He goes, no, and he jumped over the wall into all the army that were fighting him. Why did he do that? He said, if I jumped over the wall, I know you're coming in after me. If I jump back, we're retreating. We never retreat. And he had that kind of mentality. And you're like, oh, and this guy dies by sickness. It's kind of weird, but that's the way it was. But story goes, and Napoleon knew this story, that Alexander went and slept below the Sphinx. And when he did this, he had this great vision that he would be the great ruler and emperor to take over. And that's what sent him on his way to try to take over the world. So Napoleon was following in Alexander's footsteps. When France took over Egypt, he did the same thing. He went and slept under the Sphinx. Now, he never said if he saw a vision or anything like that. We don't have any record of it anyway. But back then, this was about early 1800s. Remember, this was the same time as Louisiana Purchase because Thomas Jefferson bought that from Napoleon. Napoleon was smart and said, there's no way I can defend that huge inside. We might as well sell it and get some money for it. And he was trying to take over Europe and he needed money. So it kind of worked out for both of us. This painting was painted in Europe. It wasn't painted in Egypt. You can tell because this is totally inaccurate, the background, right? The background should have pyramids back here. It should be up on a plateau. There's no valley back here. Okay, so they just said, oh, let's just stick a desert scene behind here. But part of it was accurate. You see how he was kind of buried up to his neck? He was buried up to his neck. The Sphinx was. Because over the 5,000 years of snow, there's no snow. I don't think it's ever had snow in Cairo. If it's ever the sand and stuff blowing, they're actually buried in. Remember, they dug it out in the hole. It filled up the hole over 5,000 years. So they had to excavate it back out again. And they had multiple excavations. They started in the 1800s, and they did it again in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and they did it again in 1920. And then they did it again 30 or 40 years ago to the position it's at now. Okay. So that's why I did it. So this was done by an artist. Now there's big speculation about the lack of nose or the nose breaking off. They used to think that it was actually Napoleon's soldiers that were there and they thought that they shot it off as target practice. But we don't think that's true because there are several records before Napoleon of people traveling there in the middle ages, 1700s, and they said that the nose was already gone. So we don't know. We think the nose might have broke off. It might have broken off right away. We don't know. You know, sometimes when you're building it, it might have broken off. Nobody knows exactly when the nose broke off. But we don't think it was Napoleon soldiers. That's just kind of one of those urban legends. Here it is when they started to excavate it. Now, this is an actual photograph. Remember, Napoleon was around in the 1800s. When did photographs come around? When did you start getting pictures?
Mid-1800s.
Yeah, mid-1800s. In fact, the way I always remember it is about 1860 was when we started having good photographs. That's when we had the Civil War. That's the first war we have with lots of photographs. In fact, Lincoln hired a professional photographer to go around and take pictures of all the battle sites. And so there's all gobs of pictures of dead people from the Civil War. Before that, I mean, they really started around 1840, but photographs didn't really get sophisticated about 1850, 1860. This is actually about 1880 something. And this is when they started excavating. They go, hey, it's got legs. They didn't know that because it was all buried. It was all buried up into this. In fact, most of this was all buried. If you can see, all that extra stuff, nobody knew about. It was all under sand. Then in 1925, they did what I think, and I talked about before, was a bad thing. They said, oh, we're going to restore it. Remember why this is bad? You're destroying the archaeology. You're destroying the science, and you're trying to make it the way you want it to be, not the way they actually originally had it. And they did this by putting bricks on the outside of it. saying, okay, we're going to encase it in brick, so it's underneath it, but now you lose the fact that it's actually carved out of the bedrock, and now it looks like a bricks. And you can see here, these are individual bricks. And over here, covering up over the leg or paw of the Sphinx. Yeah, that's pretty much the way it looks now. Now this part they didn't do anything with. The restoration didn't get very far, which was good for archaeologists are like, yeah, don't do that. Leave it the way it is. We don't want it to get worse, but don't try to restore it, right? Try to stop the falling apart, but don't mess with anything on it. We don't want to lose any of the archaeology. All right, last thing I'm going to talk about with the pyramids is in the late 1980s, early 1990s, they started speculating that maybe the three pyramids were lined up to match the belt stars. Sorry. Turned on Siri accidentally. But they were made to line up with the belt stars of Orion. The reason they thought this might be true is if you look at the belt stars of Orion, here they are, I just took them off a photograph. These two are in a straight line, but if you draw a line through the middle of them, this one is off of that line. If you draw a line through the middle of these pyramids, this one is above that line too. And you notice these two are actually slightly brighter than that one. And these two are bigger than that one. So they're like, oh, it must have been Orion's belt. And they were trying to line it up for Orion's belt. However, and look, if you zoom the size exactly perfect, it does match pretty well, doesn't it? All right, now archaeologists have a big problem with this theory, with several problems, I'll tell you why. First of all, in this photograph, north is up. In this one, which way is north? Oh, it's down. I had it flipped around.
Oh, it's flipped.
Right, this is totally flipped around from the way I had it before. The Great Pyramid should be at the top and it should angle down like that. So this is 180 degrees up. North is down. This is exactly flipped 180 degrees. Do you think the Egyptians that could line up a pyramid to within 6 arc minutes would accidentally flip it upside down?
NASA did it.
Yeah. So, whoops, I had the paper upside down.
With the Mars orbiter.
The other thing is Orion, that was not just those 3 stars. It had multiple stars in it. There were other stars. Osiris was more than just the belt. And there's no other, if you're going to do the whole constellation, you would have put pyramids at these other spots too. And the advantage we have with the Egyptians is they left us written language. If you were going to do that, one of the pyramids or some of the texts or some of the stuff that would have survived would have written down and said, oh, hey, we were trying to do Osiris here. There's nothing that says anything like that. So most archaeologists, I'm not saying this is wrong, I'm just saying most archaeologists believe the one that I told you before, which was that when they lined up the north, south, and east and west, they just lined up that corner, and that's where the line is. And they didn't worry about what the top was going to be, because to them, they couldn't see where the top was anyway. They had no, they couldn't fly above it like we can. There's no satellites, no pictures at all. Anyway, everything to them was what they could see on the ground. So most archaeologists feel that is the way it was done, but hey, maybe they did. We don't know. They got a lot of hype but that's typical with Egypt stuff. Every few years somebody comes up, hey, I got a new theory about how the pyramids were built. And everybody's like, yeah, it gets a little hype and then they forget about it. But several things I can tell you for sure is they were built by the Egyptians. They were not built by aliens. And yes, any sufficiently advanced human culture could build the pyramids. It didn't take anything special. It just took a huge workforce and a whole lot of money and time. Okay? You got to remember, I think we have this problem, this bias in our society. We think that people 5,000 years ago weren't as smart as we were. That is wrong. Their brains were just as big as us. What didn't they have? They didn't have technology, and they didn't have the accumulation of knowledge over time, But as far as logically deducing and thinking things out, they were as smart as we were. And yes, they easily could build this. Not a problem. In fact, we talked about there's pyramids all over the world. So any really sufficiently advanced culture that had enough time and enough money to do it could build a pyramid. So it doesn't take aliens to do that. So Elon Musk is wrong. I don't know if you guys saw that, but he tweeted that the Egyptians the pyramids were built by aliens. The Egyptian government tweeted him back. You know what they said? No, they said, come visit. We'll show you a little bit more about the pyramids. Kind of a nice way of saying, you don't know what you're talking about.
It's like, here's a nice use for the burial chamber underground that was never finished. Slam the door.
Thanks for coming. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about the pyramids, and I don't want to start anything new. So let's call it good for the day. I will see you on Tuesday.